A very good evening to everyone, and a very warm welcome to Professor Ramakumar for joining us today. We're really thankful that you are able to join us today despite your busy schedule. And we at PSF would also like to thank all the participants for joining us today on the session on Union Budget 2021. This is the ninth annual budget lecture conducted by PSF, a student initiative organization in Tata Institute of Social Sciences, Mumbai. And we aim to build a democratic, secular space and culture of rational and inclusive thinking that contributes to struggle through conducting and engaging in debates, discussions, and dialogues on the contemporary issues in the country. You can connect with us at our various social media platforms like Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. PSF has been successfully conducting these annual lectures for 9 consecutive years, and this is the ninth annual budget lecture. We at PSF would like to stress upon the fact that the union budget is not merely an annual statement of state finances, but also a document that expresses the government's vision. The 2021 Union Budget has been analyzed and discussed by various academicians and activists because of the nature of allocation to various sectors amidst the pandemic. Saying so, India is experiencing the highest rate of unemployment, deepening inequalities, agrarian distress, and increasing social marginalization. The 2021 Union Budget, therefore, must be analyzed through discussions by the people of India. We would like to introduce you to today's speaker, Professor R. Ramakumar, who is professor at Center for Study of Developing Economies and School of Development Studies at TISS Mumbai. And his key areas are economics, agricultural economics, and development experiences in international perspectives. This is the ninth annual budget lecture from 2012, and Professor Ramakumar has helped us analyze the union budget for the consecutive years, which we are deeply grateful for. So, to understand the 2021 Union Budget a bit more in detail, the lecture will be of a duration of 50 minutes to 1 hour, after which Professor will address the questions for about an half an hour. Therefore, please type your questions in the Facebook chat. With this, we would like to call Professor for an enriching discussion.
Thank you. Thank you, Punya.
Thank
Thank you very much to you and the Progressive Students Forum, uh, which has been organizing this lecture from me for the last 12 years. I keep saying this every year that I cannot not follow a budget every year because the day after the budget, I'll get a call from the office bearers of the PSF for this lecture. So I better be ready for each budget every year. Uh, but it's been a great experience over the last 9 years. Every year we have tried to analyze the budget from a people's point of view. What we have done is that we have tried to analyze the budget not just in terms of its purely macroeconomic impacts, but we have also tried to analyze it to what it does to people, the social sector, in agriculture, in rural areas, to marginalized sections, to Dalits, the Adivasis, women, disabled. We have tried to disentangle the budget numbers in these to understand what has been the impact on these sections. That has been our major effort over the last 9 years, and I'm happy that PSF has continued with that initiative this year as well. Now, what is a budget? A budget is typically a statement of accounts of a particular government. How much does it earn? How much does it plan to spend? And if it is spending, where? These are the major points that every budget tries to analyze and tries to put forward to its people. But at the same time, every budget also has a macroeconomic perspective, which is that when the budget is presented, the finance minister is supposed to look at what is the overall macroeconomic situation in the country and how is it that the budget has responded to that macroeconomic situation. This is something that is a very important context to every budget that is presented to the parliament. So, what has been the budget's macroeconomic context this year? We all know that this has been a bad year in terms of the COVID-19 pandemic, the health crisis that it unleashed, and also the economic crisis, the crisis of livelihoods that it unleashed in our society. But at the same time, it is also important to note that this crisis that we see today is also pre-COVID. The crisis of the Indian economy, the slowdown in the growth of Indian economy, all these are problems that existed prior to COVID-19 pandemic itself. If you look at the overall economic growth data, you will see that India's overall growth of gross value added (GVA) has begun to decline from 2016-17 onwards. What happened in 2016-17? There was the completely irrational and idiotic demonetization that was implemented across India. Then came the completely ill thought out GST reform, which again exacerbated the problems that were created by demonetization. From these two shocks, it appears the Indian economy has never quite recovered, and India's GVA growth fell down from about 6 to 7% that existed in 2016-17 to just about 3% in the last quarter that just preceded the attack of the COVID-19 pandemic. So India's economy on a seen in a quarterly basis, year on year, was growing only by 3% per annum just prior to the COVID-19 pandemic. That is an extremely serious situation. But at the same time, there is something more that I would like to add to it. It is not just from 2016 onwards that we have this crisis. In fact, the crisis predates 2016-17 from about 2011-12 itself. If you look at some of the major indicators that are associated with economic growth in the economy, for example, investment rate, it has fallen from 2011-12 itself continuously from about 38% in 2011-12 to about 30% or 31% today. The savings rate in the economy has also fallen from 2011-12 to 18-19 or 19-20. The share of exports in India's GDP has also fallen from about 2013-14 to about 2019-20. The overall growth of bank credit, right? That is an indicator of how much people are taking loans and investing or spending in the economy. That also has continuously fallen from 2011-12 till about 19-20. So if you see, though the GVA growth, the overall economic growth appears to be slowing down only from 2016-17 onwards, some of the major indicators of what happens in the economy, like the investment rate, savings rate, exports, bank credit, all that had begun to decline from 2011-12 itself. In other words, while the finance minister was presenting the budget of 2021-22, she was already facing a 10-year decline of investment rate, savings rate, exports, and bank credit. This is the reason why you will see that these macroeconomic changes also had a major adverse impact on the way people lived in India as well in this period. If you compare the two NSSO surveys, National Sample Survey Organization surveys, on consumption expenditure, which measures poverty, and employment and unemployment, which measures unemployment and employment, between 2011-12 and 2017-18, the same period that we just referred to, you will see that rural poverty has risen by at least about 7 to 8 percentage points for the first time after the 1970s in India. Rural poverty has always fallen. Of course, the rate of fall of rural poverty has slowed down, but rural poverty never rose in absolute terms between 1972 and 2011-12. That happened between 11-12 and 17-18. Take the question of unemployment. You will see that the unemployment rate, which hovered around 2%, 2.2%, 2.5% in 2011-12, increased to 6.5% by 2017-18, which was a 45-year-old high. Right? Not any time in the last 45 years had the unemployment reached 6.5%. That happened in 2017-18. Even after that, unemployment has continued to rise, and as private surveys like CMIE's Center for Monitoring Indian Economy surveys indicate, we continue to have, prior to the pandemic, about 8 to 9% unemployment across the country. So you are facing a serious problem of growth, a serious problem of investment, a serious problem of employment, and a serious problem of rising poverty. This is the macroeconomic context when COVID crisis hit us. COVID exacerbated an already weakened, exacerbated the crisis in an already crisis-ridden economy. Already weakened economy was further weakened with the coming of the COVID-19 pandemic. Our every economic indicator suffered significantly during this period. Our revenues fell, our growth fell, our unemployment rose, our poverty has risen, hunger has risen. Right? Uh, uh, Earlier, I mentioned about how between 2011-12 and 2017-18, you saw a rise of rural poverty and a rise of unemployment. Right? You should add to that the questions of nutrition, or rather malnutrition. Right? The comparison of 2015-16 of NFHS 4 and 2019 NFHS 5, the comparison will indicate that overall conditions of malnutrition have either remained the same, have not been affected at all, or in some cases they have even worsened in large parts of India. Right? If you look at undernourishment, if you look at wasting, all these indicators, if you take, you will see malnourishment remains unacceptably high in large parts of India. This is the macroeconomic context that the budget had to face. It had to face long-term decline of investment, savings, exports, bank credit growth. Right? It also had to face rising poverty in rural areas, rising unemployment, and rising malnourishment across the country. So, how does a budget respond to this? Is the question, particularly given the crisis that is added on to it by the COVID-19 pandemic. This is the question, this is the context that we have to first put on the table before we start analyzing the budget. What is the budget's fiscal stance towards addressing these problems of growth, investment, savings, exports, unemployment, poverty, malnourishment, etc.? Is the government ready to take the baton and lead the race? Is the government going to lead the pack with high levels of public investment and public expenditure? That is the question that we had been looking forward to while we try to understand what kind of budget will Nirmala Sitharaman present. Some people try to hype it unnecessarily, as is typical of the Modi government. Some people say this will be a never before budget. Some people try to say that this would be the budget of the century. Right? So expectations were very high. People were trying to see what is going to come out of this budget. But as I'm going to say, the budget was a damn squib. It was a complete disappointment for the economy and for the people. And when I say people, particularly for the poor and marginalized sections of the society. Let me begin this lecture by talking about the overall fiscal stance of the budget. That's extremely important to understand while we begin. The finance minister in her budget said that her fiscal deficit, which is an indicator of the kind of borrowings that she had to have in the financial year, the fiscal deficit for 2021. I'm first going to talk about the ongoing year, which is 2021, and then towards the end I shall come into the next year, what she has allocated for 21-22 also. But as of now, I'm talking about 2021, the ongoing year till March. Now, if you see, the fiscal deficit in the last budget was fixed at about little above 3% for the economy as a whole. But this fiscal deficit has now risen. It was actually 3.5% fixed in 2021 budget. But this fiscal deficit has now risen to 9.5%. This is the first point that we have to know. Fiscal deficit has risen. The government tries to tell us that this fiscal deficit rose because it spent for the people during the pandemic. So fiscal deficit has been high because the government was conscious about the needs of the people. We were committed to people's needs. That is the argument that the government makes. Let us examine that claim to begin with. And that gives us a feel of the fiscal stance of the budget. If you look at the fiscal deficit, which rose from 3.5% to 9.5%, this, how much does it grow? How much did it grow by in terms of amount? This is an increase by about, this 3.5 to 9.5 is about a growth by about rupees 10.5 lakh crores. About 10.5 lakh crores is the overall rise in fiscal deficit in India. But how much of that is because of increased investment or spending by the government? The numbers show that the actual spending of the government in 2021 has risen as compared to the budget estimates of 2021 by only about 3.5 lakh crore rupees. The government expenditures have risen only by rupees 3.5 lakh crore as compared to the budget estimates of 2021. That means that's the maximum amount the government is likely to have spent in the economy in the year of the pandemic. This is extremely important to note when we understand the overall fiscal stance. What is the point we made here? Out of 10.5 lakh crore in very sorry. Out of the rupees 10.5 lakh crore increase in fiscal deficit, the increase in government expenditure accounts for only rupees 3.5 lakh crore. What happened to the rest? Why did the fiscal deficit then rise by 10.5 lakh crore rupees? There are two reasons for this rise. This rise is partly because of a huge fall in the receipts of the government, in the revenues of the government. If you see the overall revenue receipts of the government, the overall revenue receipts of the government has fallen by rupees 4.6 lakh crore rupees as compared to what was budgeted in the last budget for 2021. Okay, so this complete disappearance of revenues by 4.6 lakh crore, thanks to the kind of lockdown that we had in the country and the kind of economic shrinkage we faced, has been one of the important reasons why fiscal deficit has risen. It's not because the government spent for the people. The government spent only 3.5 lakh crore rupees maximum, but the revenues fell by a report about rupees 4.6 lakh crore rupees. Number one. Number two is that the government had been till last year making a mockery of transparency in budgeting. It had been fudging with budget numbers. What did the government do? The government has two major expenditures in every budget. One is food subsidy, the other is fertilizer subsidy. In terms of food subsidy, the government has to pay every year an amount to the Food Corporation of India, because Food Corporation of India engages in the procurement and distribution of food grains in India. Now, the Food Corporation of India's outstanding debt stood at rupees 3.5 to 3.6 lakh crore till last year. Why? Because the government did not simply pay the FCI from its budget. And what did the FCI do? It has to incur costs in a procurement and so on. It has to pay the farmers and so on. The FCI was asked by the government to go to the open market and purchase, take loans from the open market, like for example from the National Small Savings Fund, and spend it for its costs. Right? And because this is a debt that will appear in the FCI's account books, it would not appear in the Finance Ministry's account books. And this would mean that the government's borrowing will not rise, but FCI's borrowing will rise. So you have borrowed through the FCI, but you have managed to not reflect it in the budget accounts. As a result, you can show an artificially low fiscal deficit in your budget documents. This was what this government was doing till last year. It did not pay the FCI its dues. It forced the FCI to go to the open market and borrow high interest loans from the National Small Savings Fund. And it managed to not reflect that money in the budget, in the government's budget accounts. So this time, however, there was an enormous amount of controversy around it, and the government has decided to become transparent. Right? Look at this. Decision to become transparent, which should be an everyday task for a government, has become a virtue in these times. Right? So the government has brought that money, which FCI used to borrow, into the budget and has said, don't worry, we will pay the FCI the dues for the last 2 or 3 years, which has been pending, and FCI can thus repay that loan. And thus it has allocated some amount for FCI. Similarly, fertilizer companies have to be paid fertilizer subsidies. How much was pending there? Rupees 65,000 crore rupees was pending there in lieu of payment to fertilizer companies as fertilizer subsidy. That also the government was not paying all these years. And why? Because if it had to pay fertilizer companies, then it would have to borrow. If it borrows, then it will come in the budget deficit. Right? So it was not paid. This payment to the FCI and this payment to the fertilizer companies has been this year brought into the budget. Right? And thus rupees 3.7 lakh crore has been added to the government's expenditure. This is one reason why fiscal deficit has further risen. So, three important reasons I said. Only about 1/3 of the increase in fiscal deficit is accounted for by increased spending of the government, 3.5 lakh crore. About 4.6 lakh crore is accounted by fall of revenues, and about 3.7 lakh crore is accounted by expenditure which was, of course, incurred till last year, but the only difference being that you brought them into the budget books this year. So budget deficit shot up, fiscal deficit shot up. But if you simply add these fall in revenues plus payment to FCA and fertilizer companies plus fall in revenues, you will get a fiscal deficit of 11.8. But then the fiscal deficit is only 9.5. Right? So it appears that the government has taken a decision that we should not keep the budget deficit in a double-digit number. We should keep it below 10. Right? Otherwise, if it goes to a double-digit number, we are telling the international investors, the foreign capital, that India is an unsafe place for foreign investment to come. So we should keep our fiscal deficits low. It should still be in a single-digit number. Let's keep it at 9.5, very close to 10, but not 10. Right? But how will you bring the fiscal deficit down from 11.8% to 9.5%? There's only one way to do it, which is that cut expenditures. Don't spend. Right? So your fiscal deficit was brought down from 11.8% to 9.5% through an across the board cut in expenditures, across schemes, across departments, etc., for the ongoing year. That is a very important way in which this decline was achieved by the government. I shall give you some numbers so that you will understand what I'm trying to say. So the government has cut in schemes across the board in departments for scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, Rashtriya Swasthya Bima Yojana, Green Revolution, Jobs and Skill Development, National Education Mission, Prime Minister's Grama Sadak Yojana, Swachh Bharat Mission, Metro projects. All these have seen huge cuts in expenditure in 2021 in order to achieve a further reduction of fiscal deficit from 11.8% to a fiscal deficit of 9.5%. Every department has seen a cut. Right? I'll give you some examples from here on. Let me first take agriculture, because it is a sector which everybody is watching now, because there is a massive farmers agitation going on, and people are we're looking forward to what the government has been doing in the field of agriculture. So if you see the overall spending in agriculture in the year 2020-21, that is ongoing year, you will see that total expenditures in agriculture as compared to the budgeted estimates were cut by 13%. 13%. That is from about 1.3 lakh crore to 1.1 lakh crore. Okay. If you look at other schemes in agriculture, you will see market intervention scheme. The expenditure has been cut by half, 50%. Right? If you take PM Kisan, which is the flagship scheme of the government, where 6,000 rupees is paid to a farmer household every year. Right? If you see there, the expenditure was brought down in the COVID year. That expenditure was brought down from rupees 75,000 crore to rupees 65,000 crore. 10,000 crore fall. Right? If you look at the expenditure for farmer producer organizations to form and promote FPOs, the expenditure has fallen from 500 crore to 250 crore, which is a 50% fall. If you look at schemes like Prime Minister's Krishi Sinchai Yojana of the Department of Agriculture, you will see the expenditure has fallen by 35%. That is 4,000 crore to 2,563 crore. If you take all the centrally sponsored schemes of the central government in agriculture, you will see the expenditure has fallen from about 17,000 crore to 13,000 crore, which is a fall by about 25%. Right? If you look at agricultural research and education, there is a 7% fall in expenditure. Right? So all these schemes that you see in agriculture, you see a major cut in the year 2020-21. Why? The government wants to keep the fiscal deficit artificially low. Right? Let me tell you about some other schemes. Health. Right? Health is the most important spending category in the year that we had passed by because of the COVID-19 pandemic. How much did the central government spend additionally in health in India in the year 2021? You will be surprised to know that it was only rupees 15,000 crore rupees. It was only rupees 15,000 crore rupees that was spent under the health head in the ongoing year. Additionally, right? If you look at other allotments, if you take the allotment for the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, okay, it rose by minuscule amount. That is from about 2.28% of the whole budget to about 2.4% of the whole budget. That's all, not more than that, right? If you take other schemes in health, sub schemes in health, like another scheme that the government always speaks about, which is the Ayushman Bharat, right, which is a health insurance scheme. There, you'll be surprised to know that the expenditure this year is going to fall from rupees 6,400 crore to rupees 3,100 crore. It is a more than 50% cut in Ayushman Bharat's budget for 2021. So much for the commitment of the government to health in a pandemic year, right? Take other schemes in other sectors. Nutrition. There is a scheme called Mission Poshan 2.0. Okay, it's a combination of schemes in Anganwadi services, Old Poshan Abhiyan, schemes for adolescent girls, National Creche scheme. All these are combined to form a scheme called Mission Poshan 2.0. Okay, here the spending fell from rupees 24,500 crores, which was budgeted in the last budget. From 24,500 crore, it has fallen to about 17,900 crore, which is something like a 7,000 crore rupees fall of spending in this primary scheme for nutrition in the country. Right? Take other look at NFHS 5. We already have a very bad malnourishment situation in the country. It is in that context that nutrition spending has fallen by such a drastic level. Take other schemes. Let's go to the Department of Water Resources, which is now called Department of Jal Shakti. Right there, the expenditure was cut by another about 4,000 crore, from about 21,500 crore to about 17,000 crore. You save another 5,000 crore there, right? Take another. The Prime Minister always speaks about the Swachh Bharat Mission, right? In Swachh Bharat Mission, the expenditure was cut by 5,000 crore. That is from 12,300 crore to 7,000 crore. Right? Take the rehabilitation of manual scavengers. There is a scheme. There, the expenditure fell from about 110 crore to 30 crore. 110 crore to 30 crore. The scheme, Pradhan Mantri Gram Sadak Yojana, there the expenditure fell by another 5,000 crore, from about 19,500 crore to about 13,700 crore. Take the Ministry of MSME. MSMEs are very important in India. There, the expenditure again fell by about 2,000 crore, 7,500 crores to 5,600 crore. The Ministry of New and Renewable Energy, it fell from 13,700 crore to 10,800 crore. Take all expenditures for children. Okay, for children, there again there is a sharp fall in expenditure from the budgeted amount. Take education. There is a scheme called Samagra Shiksha Abhiyan. Okay, there the spending has fallen by something like 11,000 crore. 11,000 crore. That is from the budgeted amount of 38,750 crore. It has fallen to 27,900 crore. Right? If you look at National Merit Cum Scholarship Scheme, there the expenditure has fallen from 373 crore to 350 crore. Not so much, but still there is a fall. If you take Mission Valsalya, which is a scheme which was earlier called as Integrated Child Protection Services Scheme, right? It has fallen. The expenditure there has fallen from 1,500 crore to just 800 crore. If you take the welfare of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes, there again it has fallen from 83,000 crore to about 81,000 crore. Ministry of Minority Affairs, 5,000 crores to 4,000 crores. Right? Department of Disabilities, again another 500 to 1,000 crore fall. Right? So across the board, agriculture, social sector, spending for the marginalized, minority sections, SC, ST sections, everywhere, the budget for 2021 was slashed drastically in order to reduce that fiscal deficit further from 11.8% to about 9.5%. This is the broad situation that you get in the year 2021. Across the board cut in expenditure. Right? This has been a most important problem that you see in this budget. Right? So the first point that I mentioned was the major problem that you see in in the overall fiscal stance of the government. And how was that fiscal stance achieved? That fiscal stance was achieved by the government by primarily uh, cutting expenditures across the board. And I gave you examples of schemes where this has happened. And this primarily is one reason why the government was able to show a lower fiscal deficit this year. 2021 has been a year, the pandemic year has been a year when the government has drastically cut expenditures for the people. That is the first point that I wanted to make. In fact, it's a second point. It was a supplementary to the first point that I wanted to make. Now, let me get into another area, which is again is about the ongoing year, which is related to what the government consistently calls the Atmanirbhar package. Right? What has happened to the Atmanirbhar package? What is this Atmanirbhar package? The government said that it is going to spend in the pandemic year a revival package of rupees 20 lakh crore. That was the announcement of the government made in the year 2020 in the month of May. Right? How much does the government spend? Look across the world. If you look across the world, the spendings of the government has been a very important part of the revival packages in economies. How is it? Across the world, countries have spent something like 11 trillion US dollars in terms of COVID revival packages. The International Monetary Fund, IMF, estimates that up to 50% of these revival packages are composed of direct spending by the government. The IMF calls it above the line measures. Right? The remaining 50%, below the line measures, they are largely constituted by interventions through the banking system, by loans, equity guarantees, liquidity injections, etc. So 50-50 is a broad classification that you will see at the global level. How much is it in India? The government has actually spent only about rupees 3.5 lakh crore additionally in the year 2021. That means out of rupees 20 lakh crore, the additional government expenditure is at best maximum rupees 3.5 lakh crore. In other words, if it was 50% direct spending in packages across the world, in India, the share is only 17.5%, 17.5%. Pathetic, a pittance. What has the governments across the world done? Look at Donald Trump. Somebody, a lot of people viscerally hate. Right? Even Donald Trump, maybe because it was an election year in the US, but he helped agriculture in the following way. He took the whole difference of prices between January, March, and May. He calculated the overall loss that the farmer in the US would have incurred during the lockdown period in agriculture because of a price fall. And about 70 to 80% of the loss that the farmer in the United States incurred was given to the farmer in the form of a cash transfer. 80% of the loss, up to 80% of the loss was covered by the government. This is the United States case. The United States did a lot of other things. Everyone got a check of about $1,200, right? And so on. I'm not getting into all of that. Take a country like United Kingdom. What did United Kingdom do? It was a right-wing conservative government. Still, they opened up their purses and spent for the economy. One of the largest stimulus packages in the history of United Kingdom. What did they do? They created a scheme called what is called as a furlough scheme. What did the furlough scheme do? In the furlough scheme, the small marginal enterprises, restaurants, hotels, etc., all of them have employees. They were told that if you do not dismiss your employees, if you keep their jobs intact, then between 70 to 80% of their wages will be paid to you by the government. And you have to pay only the rest of 20 to 30% of the wages to the workers. What is the condition? The condition is you don't dismiss them. They are on your payroll. Right? This became one of the big support measures anywhere in that part of Europe. Well, with Brexit, they are not exactly part of Europe, but in that part of the world during the COVID pandemic. Germany had a huge package. It's often called the German bazooka, okay, where the government investment went up many-fold during the pandemic. They did not worry about the fiscal deficit. They spent for the people. These are developed capitalist countries. Japan has spent up to 25% of its GDP on a revival package. Most countries have spent at least 10% of their GDP on a revival package. How much have we done? Not more than 15 to 20%. To 15 to 20%, where every other country had 50%. Right? Rest of the, that is 3.5 lakh crore to 20 lakh crore, you simply announce that this will be done by banks. And have banks done it? No. If you look at the amount of credit given by the banks, that shows no definite sign of increase in the COVID period. In other words, the banks have given very little additional credit to the people of India, to the enterprises of India in the last few years. In the last few months. Look at agriculture in India. Agriculture was severely affected by a few problems during the pandemic. There were no workers available for the harvest of the Rabi crop of 2020. Farmers suffered a huge rise in harvest costs in the months of March, April, and May of 2020 because of the lockdown. If you examine the total market arrivals, how much of the farmers' crop arrived at the markets of India in 2019 and 2020, compare it, you will see that the market arrivals of 2020 in most crops accounted for only about 60 to 70% of, on an average, the market arrivals of 2019. Only 60 to 70%. In some crops, it's even less than 50%. Right? Where did the remaining crop go? It did not come to the market. Farmers were forced to sell it because of the breakdown of supply chains, because of the absence of transport facilities, and so on. Farmers were forced to sell it in some informal market somewhere, surely at much lower prices than what were ruling in the market in 2020. There are two things here. One, the average prices of 2020 were lower than the average prices of 2019. So even the formal market prices were low. But about half of the produce was sold in many areas by farmers, even at a lower price, at a price lower than that lower price of 2020. The losses that farmers would have suffered runs into thousands of crores in this kind of a situation. This is the situation of agriculture. Not just this, wages have risen. There is no availability of migrant workers. Fertilizer costs have risen. Every input cost has risen during the pandemic. Right? So farmers were looking forward for something from their budget. What did they get? Nothing. Agriculture has received complete disregard in this particular budget. Let me get to industry. Okay, did you have anything close to what Donald Trump did in his economy, which is giving a check to people, or like in like in the United Kingdom, where a furlough scheme was introduced to ensure that wages of all the workers, at least a part of it, was paid by the government? Nothing, not even a trace of it in India. And what do surveys show on the ground? It shows that about 30 to 35% of the MSMEs in India, right? 30 to 35% of the MSMEs in India have closed down permanently. They will never open. Right? Another 30 to 35% of the MSMEs in India will close down if the government does not provide financial assistance. This is the kind of data that is lying in front of you. Industry bodies have calculated these numbers. Right? What did the government do? Nothing. Expectations were very high. Okay, so I spoke about agriculture, I spoke about industry. Right? Look at services sector, areas like tourism, hotels, restaurants. Right? Look at the extent of job losses that we have had in these sectors. Unemployment has become a very serious issue with the pandemic. Right? Has the government done anything in the budget to address the question of unemployment, which is without doubt the most primary challenge in front of our economy today? Nothing. Right? So agriculture, industry, services. Allow me to go back to agriculture. Say one or two things more there. Right? Look at a sector like the dairy sector, which is an allied sector of agriculture. Nevertheless, a growing, very important sector. Right? You saw that milk prices. So take a state like Maharashtra, where I live. Right? Milk prices in Maharashtra fell from 35 rupees per liter to 17 rupees per liter during the lockdown. Milk prices plummeted at an all India level. Milk prices are supposed to have fallen by at least 19 to 20% during the lockdown. Many dairies stopped procuring milk. They announced milk holidays. Right? Huge losses are there in the dairy sector. Second is, if you take the meat sector, animals could not be transported from one place to another. Abattoirs closed down. Slaughterhouses closed down. Meat demand fell by 50%. Meat prices fell by 50%. What chicken, which was selling at 85 rupees per kilo, was being sold at 5 to 10 rupees per kilo during the lockdown. Look at the poultry sector. I've spoken about dairy. I spoke about meat. Look at dairy sector. Look at poultry sector. That is chicken meat and eggs. Right? In India, if you look at layer nurseries across the country, where companies or firms provide small chicken, small chickens of a few days of age to farmers on a contract basis to grow, and they buy back them at the end of 40 to 45 days when they have grown up a little bit. This is a usual system that exists in layer nurseries of India. Right? But look at what happened in these cases. There was no demand for chicken meat, so chicken were not being sold. Plus, you have to keep on feeding this chicken, otherwise they'll die. Right? But what is happening to chicken feed? The feed costs are rising rapidly. Supply chains are broken down, so you can't get feed. Get feed also, and you can get feed only by paying very high costs. What did the farmers do across India? Lakhs, I repeat, lakhs, or even sometimes millions, there is no estimate of it. Millions of chicken birds were killed by farmers in the fields of India. Right? There are news in Haryana of one farmer burying about 1 lakh chicken birds live into a pit because he simply cannot afford the chicken feed. Right? The total losses in the poultry sector, estimated by the All India Poultry Growers Association, is rupees 30,000 crore. And that is actually on the lower side, rupees 30,000 crore. It was estimated during the lockdown. After the lockdown, what has happened? You still are at about 70% of the pre-COVID market level. You're still down 30% from what existed prior to COVID. So the losses are much more than 30,000 crore. So growers and industries in the poultry sector, dairy sector, and the meat sector expected some kind of help from the government, some kind of revival package from the government. What have they got? Nothing. They neither got anything during the during the financial year, nor have they been even promised anything for the second year, that is the next year, coming year. This is the situation that we have. Right? So if you take agriculture, there was this whole Atmanirbhar package that was announced by the government in May 2020. I'm giving you just the example of agriculture, but you can look at other examples also in the budget. But if you look at the Atmanirbhar package and how much the government has spent in the Atmanirbhar package, I earlier said that at the max they have spent up to 3.5 lakh crore. But a large part of this 3.5 lakh crore is because of the following. You increased NREGS budget by about 40 to 50,000 crore. You spent more through the PDS. You gave 5 kg extra to every household. That has some cost, which is part of this 3.5 lakh crore. Right? The extra 15,000 crore that you spent on health is part of this 3.5 lakh crore. Right? So the 500 rupees that you gave to every woman member of a self-help group in India is also a part of the National Social Assistance Program. So it has come into the budget. Right? So these small things that have come and they have added up to rupees 3.5 lakh crore. But what about the other announcements you made? It turns out two things. One is the government has spent almost nothing on anything else. Other than giving 5 kg extra, other than spending a little bit on MG and REGS, the government has basically done nothing in 2021 to improve or ameliorate the sufferings of people in the ongoing year. This becomes clear if you look at different announcements. Let me give you some examples here. You will understand it very well. The government, for example, to begin with, announced in agriculture, I'm giving you an example of agriculture, announced the rupees 1 lakh crore scheme. This was in May 2020. Many months have passed. 1.1 lakh crore financing facility for funding aggregators and farmer producer organizations. None of this 1.1 lakh crore rupees is to be spent by the government. All of it is to be raised by NABARD from the market as loans and relend it to cooperatives, banks, etc., to be lent to FPOs. No, zero government expenditure is involved, right? Even then, the data shows that if you take January 2021, that is just last month, okay, out of these rupees 1 lakh crore, only projects or loans worth rupees 2,900 crore have received in principle sanction by the government. Out of 1 lakh crore, rupees 2,900 crore loans have received in principle sanction, means it has not been given yet. So what has been given? Probably zero. Right? If you look at other schemes, then the government announced what is called as the Operation Greens. Right? They have a scheme for tomato, onion, potato, etc. They spread it to all crops, all fruits and vegetables. Right? How much is extra spending? The government claims that it has spent, but if you look at the scheme in which it falls, which is called the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana, the spending in Kisan Sampada Yojana, where Operation Greens is a part of, has declined by about 1,000, from about 1,000 crore to about 750 crore, which is a fall by rupees 331 crore rupees. There again, the additional expenditure was most probably zero. Okay? Then the government announced a 10,000 crore scheme for micro food enterprises, enterprise clusters, as they call it. Okay, but here again, what they have done is they have created a new scheme. They have spent 400 crore in that budget, under that head. Rupees 400 crore has been spent, but a very similar scheme that existed side by side with it, which is called again the same scheme called Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana. There the expenditure has been cut. So basically what they have done is they've created a new scheme, spent 400 crore in it, but that 400 crore did not come fresh from anywhere. It was cut from an already existing scheme with very similar objectives. What is the net expenditure in here? My calculations show that the net additional expenditure is not more than 69 to 70 crore. 69 to 70 crore, that's it. Not more than that. Much fanfare was there when they announced the Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana. Okay, how much is the extra expenditure here? Here again, the budget papers show that 700 crore is the expenditure under Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, right? But just next to Pradhan Mantri Matsya Sampada Yojana, there is another scheme, very similar, because both are supposed to improve fisheries infrastructure. Another scheme called Integrated Development and Management of Fisheries. They are very similar, but a new scheme has been added with Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana. Right now, 560 crore was allocated to that scheme in this budget. What was spent? Zero. Very clearly, this 560 crore that was allocated to integrated development and management of fisheries has been cut out, added to Pradhan Mantri Kisan Sampada Yojana, and shown as an additional expenditure of 70 crore there, 700 crore there. The additional expenditure then is not more than 140 crore. 140 crore out of rupees 20 lakh crore package. Right? Then I can give you more examples. National Animal Disease Control Program. Right? The total expenditure that was supposed to be there for that already existing scheme was 1,300 crore rupees, but the expenditure was cut to just rupees 858 crore rupees. This is a cut by about 440 crore in that head. Then Animal Husbandry Infrastructure Development Fund. Right? The whole announcement was that it will have an investment of rupees 15,000 crore over 3 years. Right? And the allocation for that scheme was rupees 127 crore in the year 2021. How much was spent? Just 77 crore. That is a fall by 50 crore. Right? Take every scheme like this in the Atmanirbhar package. You will see that the government literally has not spent anything new during the current year. All the rupees 3.5 lakh crore additional spending that the government claims that the budget papers show are on account of 3 or 4 items only, not more than that. Increase in NREGS budget, increase in food subsidy because of additional allocation of 5 kg per household in food grains and pulses. Okay, a little expenditure of 15,000 crore in the field of health. That's all. And of course, a small payment of rupees 500 crore. Rupees 500 per woman in each self-help group. Add all these 4 components, you get very close to rupees 3.5 lakh crore. That's all that the government has done. All the other announcements that the government made in the month of May 2020 have seen zero or nominal, minuscule expenditures in the current year. The Atmanirbhar package, thus in my view, was a hoax. The Atmanirbhar package basically had 3 or 4 items which were already announced by the government in the month of March, as what they call as Pradhan Mantri Anna Suraksha Yojana or something of that sort. If you add up all those items plus the NREGS additional allocation of 40,000 crore announced in May, that adds up to all your package. That's all your Atmanirbhar package is about. Nothing else. In other words, the government spent almost 0 rupees on increasing economic growth, expanding employment in this country during the ongoing year. Why? You were worried about rising fiscal deficit. Why are you worried about fiscal deficit? You think that if fiscal deficit rises, then it is probably going to displease foreign investors who are expecting to come and invest in your country. Right? Now, this takes me to the coming year. That's the last part of what I want to speak on. Right? I'll spend another 5 to 6 minutes on that. The last part is about what are you going to do for the next year. That is, what is budgeted for 2021-22. Here you will see what is the government, again, you have to start from the top. What is the government trying to do? The government is saying we will reduce the fiscal deficit from 9.5% to 6.8% between 2021 and 21-22. Right? Now, this means that in the coming year, close to 2.7% of the GDP will have to be cut from the expenditures incurred in the year 2021 unless revenues rise substantially to cover for this. But revenues are not going to rise substantially because your economic growth is likely to be slow and the recovery is going to be gradual because of what the government itself has done, that is not spending for the economy, not investing in the economy. As a result, what is going to happen is most of this fall of fiscal deficit by about 2.7 to 2.8% of the GDP will have to be borne by fall or cut of expenditures in different schemes or departments. In other words, the year 21-22 is going to be a hugely contractionary year for the Indian economy. This is something that we have to get geared up for. We're going to see a huge fall of expenditures across the board in the budget in the year 21-22. That is a year beginning April 1st. Right? Now, how is this going to happen? Take, for example, the part where the government is supposed to have, claimed to have, increased transparency in budgeting by bringing in FCI's loans, fertilizer company payments, etc. into the budget, which is why the fiscal deficit rose in 2021. What is going to happen? Is FCI not going to take any more loan, which is what the finance minister said in her budget speech? Hardly. The FCI's allocation for 21-22, after paying for the loans that it has to repay, continues to be short in deficit by about 85,000 crore rupees. In other words, the FCI will still have to go out and borrow rupees 85,000 crore in 21-22, which will not be shown as a budget deficit in the budget papers, and the government will continue to keep it out of the real fiscal deficit of the country. Otherwise, it should have allotted that amount also to FCI. Right? This means that 21-22 is going to be a year where FCI will go back to borrowing and the government will go back to fudging its budget accounts. Transparency was just a one-time allowance given to the people of India. Fertilizer companies also need payment. There again, both food subsidy and fertilizer subsidy have been cut in the budgeted expenditures set for the year 21-22. Right? This is the first point. Both FCA and fertilizer subsidy arrears are set to return. Other aspects, if you see, the most important component is PM Kisan in agriculture. Right? There, the expenditure for next year has been cut from 75,000 crores rupees, which was budgeted for 2021, to 65,000 crore in 21-22, a 10,000 crore fall in PM Kisan. Right? Look at other schemes. PM Kisan, by the way, when PM Kisan was introduced, the idea was that it will go to 14.5 crore farmers of India. How many farmers does it go to today? Not more than 10.5 to 11 crore farmers. That means that the whole uh, point about PM Kisan was to ensure that more people from 11 crore, you have to go up to 14.5 crore farmers and bring them into the net. For that, you need more money, not less money. But you have allocated 10,000 crore rupees less for PM Kisan in this year's budget. What is the other thing you can think about? In my view, particularly given the government's stance with respect to the three farm acts and the farmers' agitation, the government is most probably going to release an order whereby it is going to declare that it is ending, halting open-ended procurement of rice and wheat from the states of India. In other words, there will be an upper limit set for what can be procured from each state, and above that point, the government will refuse to procure at the MSP from the farmers. Why? To keep food subsidy under control, to keep fiscal deficit under control. So you can very well see, most probably, you will see a fall in or end to open-ended procurement of rice and wheat. The minimum support prices can also be sure not to rise beyond a point in the next year. Why? If MSP is rise, procurement cost will rise, food subsidy will rise. Right? Look at other things that you are likely to see. One of the big challenges of today is to expand employment, and particularly rural employment. What is the most important source of rural employment? The National Rural Employment Guarantee Program, NREGS. Right? There, the allocation, if you look at the revised expenditure of 2021, which is 1.1 lakh crore, it has been cut to something like, I forget the correct amount, it's about 70 to 72,000 crore. It's a cut. Well, the need is to expand NREGS. You have ended up cutting NREGS budget. Right? Look at other things in the budget. For example, the social security pensions. Right? The standing demand is every household, every elderly in India, for example, should be paid a social security pension of at least 2,000 rupees per month. Currently, it's a pittance of about 200, 300, 400 rupees, differs in each state. In Kerala, it is about 1,600 rupees per month. Very close to 2,000 rupees per month. Right? That the demand is at the all India level, it should be like that. But given the stance of the government to cut fiscal deficit in the next year, you can expect that to be forgotten. That is not going to be an issue that will be taken up at all. Similarly, expenditures in terms of pension payments, expenditures in petroleum subsidy. The allocation was 40,000 crore this year, 2021. That is going to be cut to 12,000 crore in the next year. Fuel prices can be certain to rise drastically in the coming year. Rural development, health, all these are going to see sharp falls in expenditures this year. There's something really shameful happened this year, which is that the government has said that it's going to hugely raise health expenditures in the next year. People examined that's a very good thing if that happens. So people examine what is it that the government is claiming to be such huge expenditures in health. It turns out that a lot of expenditures in nutrition, sanitation, etc. has been brought into the health budget, added to it, and just padded it up and shown as a huge amount. To that, the government has also added something we never really had, which is grants of the Finance Commission for health-related needs. That also has been added to it. Right? Basically, by comparing apples and oranges, the government is claiming that the orange is bigger than the apple. Right? So this is completely unprecedented. Okay, one actually felt that more transparency would be brought into the budget making process, but actually it is becoming more and more opaque if you see the budget numbers very closely. The last point that I would like to mention is the following: that if you see many of the numbers that increased expenditures that the government is saying that it will bring into spending process next year, you will see that a lot of these changes the government is going to bring about through a massive expansion of privatization exercise in India. Right? What is this privatization exercise? Disinvestment. Right? The government sees no other way to raise expenditures other than by earning money, not by increasing taxes on the rich and so on. Right? For example, the government last year cut the corporate tax drastically to about 20 to 25%, from about 30 to 35%. Right? My friend Dr. Surajit Majumdar from JNU has calculated that the total fall of corporate tax revenues in India from all companies would be less by 18 to 20% because of this corporate tax fall. That much is the gain for corporates. Look, in the pandemic year, profits have risen for corporates. One would expect that in corporates would be running into losses in the pandemic year, but profits have hugely grown in the pandemic year. Why is it? Why is it? It has happened because of 2 3 reasons. Companies have been producing less because the demand is less, and because they've been producing less, there is much less cost involved in many items of expenditure. They have dismissed thousands of workers from their workforce, particularly in the who are half informal or fully informal. Right? That has again brought down their costs. So, because of such huge cutting of costs, which affects people's welfare adversely because it leads to a rise in unemployment, companies have been able to show much higher levels of profit this year compared to last year. Corporates are extremely happy in 2021 because their profits have been rising. Right? That is a context, but you're not ready to tax them. In fact, the tax revenues from them are going to fall by about 18%, which I just mentioned. So then where will you get this money? The government, as usual, claims that we are going to sell off a lot of our family silver and we are going to earn money. In every strategic sector, not more than one PSU will be retained. In many sectors, there will be no PSU at all. Rest will be sold off. Banks are going to be sold off. Insurance FDI is being raised from 49% to 75%. Right? That is where the key point is. Life Insurance Corporation of India. Okay, the crowning jewel of India's post-independence economic growth, Life Insurance Corporation of India, that is going to be sold off or disinvested significantly. What is? Let us see what is happening to FCI. There's an old the privatization of FCI is an old demand. Okay, in fact, if you see in the year 1989, the American government had asked India, and in fact threatened the VP Singh government of 1989 with what is called as the Super 301 trade sanctions if India does not privatize its insurance sector. Right? At that time, Carlos Hills, who was the US trade representative, had even said that we will prize open India's insurance industry. But VP Singh stood very adamant, which was very clear on this, that he's not going to privatize the insurance sector. But the pressure continued from the United States and other Western powers, IMF, World Bank, all of them. Right? Finally, when the Vajpayee government took over in 1997 or 98, what is called as the Insurance Regulatory and Development Authority Bill was passed to facilitate the penetration of foreign and private insurance companies into India. That was the first effort to privatize insurance industry in India. Then came the Modi government in 2014. And what happened in 2015? In 2015, once again, the FDI limits of the insurance industry were increased to about 49%. So as to roll out. Why was it done in 2015? Barack Obama was visiting India. And you wanted to offer a red carpet welcome to Barack Obama by saying, here is our insurance company for you to buy. You're selling it off. Right? So this is the situation that we have. But from 1998, if you see, about 23 years have passed. If you see these 23 years, or 20 to 22 years have passed, but about 23 private players have come into the insurance industry. But what is the market share of the Life Insurance Corporation? 70%. They're the kings of the insurance market, even after every foreign company has come knocking on India's doors. Right? Now, the asset base of LIC, which was established in 1955, with about 5 crore share capital, you will see that today's asset base is about 31 lakh crore for LIC. It is the highest for any public sector insurance company anywhere in Asia. Right? Its customer base, 40 crore. Right? LIC settles 98% of its claims, unlike private companies which simply find all kinds of ways not to settle the claims. Right? It is world's #1 insurance company in claim settlement.
He will join right now in some time. Till then, you can please type in your questions in the chat box. Professor has some technical issues, network issues, so please type your questions in the chat box and we'll take it up when a professor comes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes, we can.
Yeah, I'm very sorry.
No, no,
That
it's
I
okay.
think there was a problem with the network. So I was talking about. Did you hear the part when I was talking about LIC? Was that audible to you?
Yes, Professor, after which it
Yes,
lagged.
right.
Yeah.
So basically, it pays every year more than rupees 20,000 crore as dividend to the government. It has invested something like rupees 29 lakh crore in the economy till March 2019. It also invests in government securities, housing, irrigation, roads, etc. Right? It has been paying thousands of crores of rupees to the government through income tax, GST, sales tax, etc. Right? No country anywhere in the world has an institution like LIC. LIC is a unique institution. Right? It's not even a company. It's created by an act of the parliament. Right? No country in the world has an institution like LIC to contribute to the overall economic development of the country. It acts as a stabilizing force whenever stock markets are in disarray. Right? Time and again, it has come to the rescue of Indian financial markets by making huge investments. When share prices are falling, LIC comes in and purchases huge amounts of shares in order to prop up the market. Right? Thanks to its huge corpus of funds, it has also been government's go-to lender. Whenever government has a need, it can go to FCI and get the money. It has come to the government's rescue in many cases. For example, capitalizing state-run banks. Right? For example, LIC holds equity stake in most public sector banks of the country. Right? It bails out weaker companies whenever they run into trouble. Example, IDBI Bank was in trouble. LIC came in and rescued the IDBI Bank. It invests in various government initiatives. For example, it invests in Uday bonds, it invests in National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. Most of the money that the government invests in infrastructure comes from LIC also. It has independent directors in 54 companies. That is the kind of investments that LIC has made. Okay. Additionally, LIC has, whenever government wants to disinvest also, no private player is ready to buy a company which is put on sale. So government asks LIC to buy that company. So LIC goes and buys a few shares of that company, a few thousand shares of that company, right? So, for example, in March 2018, LIC subscribed to 70% of the shares on offer when the Hindustan Aeronautics Limited IPO was floated. Nobody was buying it. So, government asked LIC, yeah, help karo. And they went and bought 70% of the shares of HAL and propped up that in this investment program. Right? Now, the government's argument is that you need foreign capital in insurance because new products will come, our insurance markets will develop, and so on and so forth. Okay, but many insurance giants in the world, okay, AIG, for example, classic example, okay, had run into serious troubles when the 2008-9 financial crisis hit the world. Okay, AIG was actually AIG was actually bailed out by the US government by pumping nearly 5 lakh crore US dollars, 5 lakh crore US dollars to bail out the company called AIG. Right? Look at India. Look at India at that time. Most public sector banks, as well as insurance companies like LIC, New India Assurance, etc., stood tall, stood firm, even in the midst of a huge financial crisis that was unfolding. They were steady because it did not get into speculative activities. They contributed to the economic development of the country. They invested in the country. They helped the government in needs of money. Right? That's why I said no other country has an institution like the LIC. Many private firms have come. Have they led to any rise in insurance penetration in India? Have they brought in any new insurance products to India, as the government claims? No. That is why the LIC still has 70% market share. No private insurance company has been able to touch that market share beyond a point, right? So the point is, the only thing that the private insurance companies have brought in are what is called as the unit linked insurance plans, ULIPs, not more than that. right? And no new products have come, no new technology has come for customer servicing, and LIC, on the other hand, has been systematically upgrading its technology. It's one of the technology leaders in the adoption of technology. It is one of the leaders when it comes to customer service, right? But at the same time, the international pressure to privatize LIC has been growing. For example, the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, in 2018 asked the Indian government, okay, to remove the sovereign guarantees that the state provides to LIC. What do you mean by sovereign guarantee? When LIC claim is made and the claim is not paid by LIC, the premium payer can be sure that LIC, if LIC is not paying, the government will surely pay, because the government has actually has assured, there's a government insurance, there's a government assurance that the money will be paid by the government if LIC falls. That's why people trust LIC. But IMF wanted that guarantee the government provides to LIC to be taken away. And LIC should be converted into a company under the Companies Act instead of an act of the parliament. Only then it can be sold. Right? So here is a golden goose which the government wants to sell. This is one huge problem that we have in the disinvestments. The government somehow wants to sell LIC and to get rid of the company in order to make some money for the next year. Not just LIC, many public sector units like this, which are profit making, which are industry leaders, which contribute to the economic development of the country, which add to the revenues of the country. In fact, the total dividend that is paid by public sector companies to the government runs to, if I'm correct, roughly about 1.5 lakh crore rupees every year. That much will be the loss if there are no PSUs in this country. Right? Who will compensate for that increase in loss of revenues? People will have to suffer because investment expenditure of the government will be cut. Right? So privatization, disinvestment is the only thing that the government has to offer to the people of India for the coming year, 2021-22. Nothing else. It doesn't want to tax the corporate sector. It doesn't want to touch the rich. It doesn't want to increase its revenues through borrowing also, because if you borrow, fiscal deficit will rise, foreign capital will be upset. So the only option it has to offer to the Indian people is to sell family silver, as they call it. This is the situation that we have. Okay, so the budget has been a disaster for me. A lot of people call it a good budget, a great budget, and so on. For me, I think I look at the budget. I look at the budget in terms of the current year, 2021, and the next year, 21-22. Has it spent anything for this year in the pandemic year? Nothing. Pittance. Is it going to increase spending next year? Hardly. Then what is the plan of this government to revive economic growth, to expand employment, to reduce poverty? Nothing. Right? So that's why this budget has been a huge disappointment. It is not a disappointment if you understand the clear class bias of this particular government. This government has earlier we used to say Tata Birla, now it's AA, Adani Ambani, right? While it's a metaphor to use, but the whole point is that the government has this is a government that is fundamentally crony in its approach to the economy. Okay, we have heard the name crony capitalism and so on, but nothing to the extent to which this government has been practicing over the last 5 to 6 years. It has basically destroyed the Indian economy, beginning from demonetization. It has destroyed the Indian economy. India's economic growth rate, which used to be 7 to 8% in the 2010 in the first decade of the 2000s, has fallen drastically under this government. Investment has fallen, savings have fallen, exports have fallen, bank credit has fallen, unemployment has risen, poverty has risen, nutrition has fallen. This is the situation where the government has produced a budget where it is simply refusing to spend. And this is extremely problematic in my view. Right? And that's how I see this whole budget, looking at it for 2021 and the prospects for 21-22. Thank you. I'll stop for now and I'll take some questions from the audience over the next 15 or 20 minutes. Thank you. Thank you very much, PSF.
Thank you, Professor, for raising such pertinent arguments. And it's truly disappointing to see that the government of India yet again has failed its people. So the first question which we'd like to ask you is that why massive cut of rupees 2000 crores in school education allocations even when the NEP was passed in 2020?
Well, the education spending is a huge disaster in this year's budget. Okay, in many cases, if you'll see, the total education budget was slashed by 6% in 2021, from about 99,000 crore to about 93,000 crore. That is the overall fall in education budget that you see for the ongoing year, 2021. Okay, and if you take the 93,000 crore, which is reported for 2021, it is the lowest education expenditure in the last 3 years. That is a reality of the spending. The allocation for higher education, which is what students in TISS, for example, will be interested in, has been cut by roughly rupees 1,000 crore in the year 2021. Okay, many of us have not got our full salaries as yet. Only 70% of our salaries have been credited because the institution says the UGC has not given them adequate funding to pay salaries. Right now, look at, for example, school education. Right, I already mentioned while I was speaking about the Samagra Shiksha Yojana, where the expenditure was drastically cut. Look at other schemes. For example, the government, well, even for its privatization efforts, it is not spending. For example, they said the UGC will go away and it will be replaced over a period of time by what is called as the Higher Education Funding Agency, HEFA. Okay, which will be a fund where institutions could bid and actually get funding from them depending on your ranking in NIRF and so on. That is the whole idea. But how much has been allocated this year for that scheme? 1 crore. What was it last year? 2,100 crore. From 2,100 crore, you have reduced that spending to 1 crore. Right? Similar cuts in expenditure can be seen in scholarships for SC/ST students, in giving maintenance grants to colleges. Everywhere there is a drastic cut. Why? Because you don't want fiscal deficit to go into a double-digit number. What will happen if it goes to a double-digit number? You're scared that investors will be worried about the security of their investments in this country. Right? So education has a really bad year, and the next year doesn't look like very different.
Thank you, Professor. So, everyone, all the participants can type in the questions. There is a question. The first one is did the slowdown in tax receipt started before the lockdown? Why is the government going against the idea of progressive taxation? Professor, you're muted.
The basic idea of this government is to keep the tax structure not progressive but regressive. Okay, that is the primary art. One is this government relies more and more, and not just this government, for some time now we have seen an increasing reliance on indirect taxes rather than direct taxes. Okay, indirect taxes are primarily regressive while direct taxes are progressive. You should tax the incomes of the rich, you should tax the profits of the corporates, you should tax their wealth, you should put inheritance tax on their wealth. All these are what are extremely important in terms of when you think of direct taxes. Indirect taxes, both Ambani and the poorest person pay the same tax on a soap or a toothbrush, right? So it's hardly progressive, it's a regressive tax. This regressive tax share in the overall revenues have been rising over the years, and this has continued this year also. Number one. Number two is this idea of progressive taxation means the government will have to tax its own cronies. How can I tax my own friend? He's my own friend. I take his plane for election campaigns. He pays for my campaign rallies. How can I tax him more? He basically gives me all these facilities primarily because I've reduced his taxes. Why would Ambani lend you his plane if you ask him to pay more taxes, right? So progressive taxation and Modi government is like an oxymoron. No, they simply don't go together. Right? A government which is crony in its approach will be regressive in its taxation policies. That's a no-brainer.
Okay, we'll take the next question. Uh, Someone is asking a clarification that
Yes.
yeah, did you mean
Can
to
I take it?
say
I have
11?
read it.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Padmini, I said 11.8% of the GDP as fiscal deficit. If you if you see the additional expenditure of rupees 3.5 lakh crore plus the fall of revenues by about 4.6 lakh crore plus the 3.7 lakh crore you paid to you brought into the budget from FCI and fertilizer subsidy. If you just did that, then your fiscal deficit would have been 11.8%, right? But your fiscal deficit is only 9.5%. How did you come down from 11.8 to 9.5%? Roughly 2% of the GDP of the economy you cut in the form of expenditures across the board in all schemes and departments. If you had not done that, the fiscal deficit would have been double digit. Double digit is yours 11.8 here, right? So 11.8, if you add it, it comes to this. If you calculate it as a percentage terms also, you will get roughly the same, right? I made some rough calculations. It comes to about 11.8% to me when I made these rough calculations. Yes, you're right. It also adds up to something like 11 point something in lakh crore, right? But in terms of fiscal deficit also, it would be somewhere around there. These are not exact calculations because it takes a lot of time to put out these numbers very carefully. But my initial view is that you would have touched something like 11.8% in the absence of cut in expenditure. You're right. It also adds up to something close to 11.8 lakh crore also.
Okay.
Harshita has this question. Can I take this, Punya?
Yeah, yes, Professor,
Yeah,
sure.
there has been a reduction in expenditure on nutrition and food security, and the focus is said to be on the so-called overall health. How will it affect states like Bihar, with even more increased unemployment post-COVID and with high levels of malnutrition? Very badly, very badly. In fact, one thing that is very important to note is, as a share of the gross tax revenues, the share that is given to states as a center share has been very low this year. Okay, in fact, if I remember correctly, close to 1.5 lakh crore is the money that should have been paid to the states, but not paid. Okay, I think it fell from something like 6.2 lakh crore to 5 point some lakh crore. So about 1 to 1.5 lakh crore is the amount not paid to the states this year, and this will affect the poorer states like Bihar very badly for sure. Okay, because they will not be able to spend in social welfare, but anyway they don't spend much. They will not be able to spend in schemes like NREGS beyond the point. They will not be able to spend in schemes to create other forms of employment in rural areas. Their social welfare provisions will be stuck, and the overall economic condition will certainly deteriorate. So this is very important. It's a problem for all states, but it will certainly affect poorer states more than other states.
There's a next question. Yeah. So,
Ashish, Atmanirbhar is a capitalist scheme where the government is washing its hands off the private sector, but public sector. There is deepened inequality, capitalist inequalities. How can we have a return to even basic empathetic welfare politics and policies and forget larger pertinent structural changes? First, change this government. Vote out this government. Requirement number one, Ashish. So that is one primary requisite for any progressive change. Even to start to start with the P of progressive, you will have to get these guys out. Right. That is the most important thing that is required. This government has been a disaster for the economy and a disaster for social welfare. That has to be corrected, number one. But on the other hand, you ask about the Atmanirbhar scheme. The Atmanirbhar scheme was never about government coming into the economy and spending. The Atmanirbhar scheme, if you remember the May announcements of the government, you will see that it even included things like allowing private sector in space investments. Right? What does private investment in space have to do with your COVID economic policy, unless you want to start quarantine centers in Mars? Right? There's no other reason why you should include a scheme like that into your COVID revival package. Right? So very clearly, the COVID revival package was about rewarding the cronies of the government even more, by expanding the agenda of privatization, by withdrawing the state from intervention in the economy, by reducing corporate taxes, by allowing them to profit here. Right? This was always the primary objective of the Atmanirbhar package. Yes, it provided 5 kg more to people in terms of PDS grains. It provided 40,000 crore for NRAGS. Okay, fine. That's basic for any government to do in a pandemic year, right? But if you look at the examples of countries across the world, what India has done is almost nothing in comparison, right? As I want to repeat this point. In every COVID revival package in the world, the government spent 50% of the package. In India, the government spent only 17% of the package, not more than that, right? And this meant that economic revival in India will be very difficult. A revival of employment will be very difficult, and rural poverty will be under stress for a very long time, right? And this, even a basic return to what you call as welfare politics and policies, will require substantive political change, and you know what I mean. Can we have a comment from your side on the farmers' bills with respect to market promises according to the government? Well, I literally give one lecture a day on these farm laws, so I'm not going to repeat all that. I'm sure you can find it on YouTube or Facebook Lives in different places. But the key point that I've been mentioning is that the farmer bills are simply not going to help the farmer. It is an agenda for increased corporatization of agriculture in India, which is very much a part of the overall neoliberal policy for agriculture in India. It is not going to provide increased choices to the farmer. It is not going to provide a higher price to the farmer. It is not going to eliminate middlemen. It is not going to make contract farming an attractive proposition. It is simply opening up the doors of agriculture to companies to come and do what they want. What we want is good regulation, but what we have is a pro-corporate, poor regulation in place. The Essential Commodities Act, when it is repealed, you will see huge corporates coming into the field of storage and warehousing. I'll give you an example. Gautam Adani waiting in the wings for procurement to end, FCI to be closed down, and mandis to go away so that they can come into the logistics business in a big way. Adani already, he's the largest port operator of India. He's already the largest airport operator of India. From that, pull the supply chain back, you will see in the logistics chain, Adani Logistics Limited is there, which has recently bought, using a 300 crore rupees investment, a company called Snowman Logistics. Snowman Logistics is a company with already 30 to 35% market share in cold chain infrastructure in India. So in other words, Adani Logistics Limited already has about 40 to 50% capacity in integrated cold chain service providers of India. Then on the other end, you will have Adani with Adani Agri Fresh, which is like Reliance Fresh, right? So you see increasing corporatization and concentration of economic activities, right from ports and airports on the one hand, right up to the retail chain on the other end, right? So this kind of concentration of corporate capital is the primary objective of these particular legislations, and that's the prime reason why farmers are agitating against it. It is also important to underline that these laws are unconstitutional in the sense that these are states' jurisdictions where the center has usurped the role of the states and legislated for the farmers. Remember, no farmer organization ever asked for these legislations. Okay, it has been thrust on them, and they are saying we don't want, but they are saying just keep it. We want you to keep it. Right. So that's the contradiction that we have. So that's my quick answer to your question with respect to the farm bills. Can you please share the materials related to the reduction of the budget in the social sectors and rural development? Happy to. You can write to me, but I'll also direct you to another interesting source. If you go to, in fact, two interesting sources. One, you can go to the website of this organization called CBGA. I forget, Budgetary Governance and Accountability. I'm forgetting what is CBGA. If you go, you will see a very interesting publication of the CBGA on the central budget, where they list out many of the reductions in budget in social sectors very clearly in very simple tables. Number two, you can also go to the website called openbudgets.in. Okay, if you go to that openbudgets.in, many of the budget numbers can be actually extracted by you. Uh, uh, it's a very user-friendly interface. You can download, you can create graphs, tables, etc., according to what you actually want to extract from the budgets. That also allow back series of budgets to be downloaded. Right. So I'm happy to share, but you can also see cbgaindia.org. You can see the link below here. Gautam has posted it. You can also go into openbudgets.in. That's another site that you can go. That's my answer to your question. The government has been claiming, including the economic survey, that we are on a V-shaped economic recovery. Can you shed some light about this claim? There is a lot of play with letters of the alphabet with respect to what the economic recovery will look like. Some people say, first they said it's U, but U means the base of the U has a little horizontality to it, right? And then it starts rising. That means recovery would be slow, but that's not palatable to the current government. So they said it's not U, it's V, because it goes up quickly without a horizontality to it, right? So now it has become, earlier it was U, but now it has become V. But what many people say is neither U or V, but it's K, right? By K, what you mean is you fall like this. That's the first line of K, and then one line goes up and one line goes down. So the rich go up and the poor go down, right? In the right side of K. So what a lot of people say is there is actually a K-shaped recovery, and K-shaped recovery means the rich get richer and the poor fall back. Now, the reality, whatever letter in the alphabet that you want to use, the economic survey's claims are mostly nonsense. This is one of the worst economic surveys you have had in the last many years. It is poorly prepared. The graphs are wrong. The arguments are poorly written, poorly articulated, and I'm very happy to say some of the MA development studies term papers that I read for my course are better than parts of the economic survey. Okay, that is the state of our economic survey under the present dispensation. The point is that economic survey's claim is nonsense because there is no sign that we have that our employment is picking up, our investment is picking up, our savings are picking up, or any sector of the economy, is substantially recovering from the onslaught of the pandemic. Some of the calculations that I made with my former colleague in TISS, but colleague in research, Dr. Tejal Kanitkar, shows that our economy might actually shrink, not by 10% as the government is claiming now, but by at least 15%. If that happens, then you're going to see a substantial fall of employment in this country. A huge fall of a rise of unemployment, a fall of employment would mean that overall demand in the economy will remain constrained. And if demand does not rise in the economy, and if the government does not come and invest or spend in the economy, then there is no scope at all for any growth prospect. In fact, John Maynard Keynes famously said when the Great Depression hit that even if there is a public works scheme whereby the government digs a hole in the morning, they ask workers to dig a hole in the morning and cover it in the afternoon and go home with a wage, it is still better because the people will have wage in their hands and they will go and spend it and demand will rise, even if no economic asset is created in the form of that pit. Right? The only such activity that I saw in the most recent times is fixing nails one day in the borders of Delhi and next day removing the nails because there was a lot of international uproar. Right? But that is the only new labor that I see being created in the borders of Delhi. But the point is, there is no effort by this government, to revive growth, expand employment, and give relief to people. And as a result, I don't see a V-shaped coming at all in any form. In fact, the metaphor of K is much more suited to what we are seeing. Though I won't use that letter in an argument, but in a metaphorical sense, if you want to look at it, yes, the inequality levels are going to really become unmanageable if the situation continues as it is now. Yashwant, since 90s decade, all governments, including the left, are adopting pro-globalization privatization policies. In this scenario, how can we build politics around bringing back the idea of the welfare state? India never had a welfare state, Yashwant. India never had a welfare state. The only welfare state in India you had is Kerala, and that is a left state. Okay, and I know what you are hinting at, but I refuse to agree with you that the left ruled states in India did not have welfare state agendas. Kerala is the world famous in terms of not just creating a social welfare state, but also showing a model to the world in terms of what a government should do in the time of a pandemic. It has one of the uh, most spectacular public health systems in the world after the National Health Service of England. It has an extraordinary public school system where students from every category of the society, Dalits, Adivasis, Muslims, study without any discrimination, where they pay no fees. The privatization of education is one sector where Kerala has simply put a break on. Look at other states like Tripura. You will see in states like Tripura the extent to which schemes like Forest Rights Act have been implemented. Land has been given to Adivasis is unprecedented, right? There have been some. There is a problem in terms of how the idea of welfare state was conceptualized and implemented in West Bengal. No doubt about it, and that's something that the left movement in the country has to accept in a self-critical mode and find solutions to in the past. But to say that all governments, including the left, are adopting pro-globalization privatization policies is actually a wrong characterization of the actual situation. I also think that if you think of the country as a whole, we need to bring in a welfare state, not bringing back. Bringing back means we had it. That we never had a welfare state in India. We have to create it, right? And that's where I think I've always argued that this is the time when all political parties and all political sections which have a pro-poor agenda, the left, the Ambedkarites, all of them have to hold hands together and to create a joint agenda and a movement, right, in this era of globalization. That is extremely important. Mrinal, we can understand disinvestment in PSUs which can't generate much revenue to the state, but why is the government selling shares of PSUs which earn a huge revenue for them? Their argument is that if you put a loss-making PSU on sale, nobody will buy. So if you want somebody to buy a PSU that you put on sale, it has to be a profit-making PSU. That is why all profit-making PSUs are put on sale. LIC, other oil companies, etc. Right? Who wants to buy? They are trying to sell Air India. Nobody is buying Air India. Right? That's why they're putting LIC to sale. LIC is profitable. People will come and buy. Your agenda is not to ensure that your industries work more efficiently. The agenda is to make money. When the agenda is to make money, you don't care about what you're selling. Right? When your agenda is to make money, you will sell the choicest. You will sell that company which makes the highest profit, because only if you sell that you will get the highest amount of return. That's the situation that you have. So obviously this is obvious, because if you put a loss-making industry on sale, nobody will buy it. As you mentioned, Anukriti asks, the budget makers want to look good by showing off a single-digit fiscal deficit. What happens if there is no reduction and the figure is double-digit, which scares off foreign investors? Will the result be still scary? Will taxing the rich corporates be the only and sufficient measure? I think it has to be a combination. I'm not saying there's only one solution to this problem. You have to do multiple things. You have to borrow a bit, you have to tax the rich a bit, and you have to look at other modes of revenue mobilization. So it has to be a combination of all these things. I'm not saying one against the other, or only one and not the other. Basically, you will have to look for ways of innovatively generating resources to spend for the creation of assets and employment in the economy. How will you do that? If borrowing is required, you should borrow. Look at foreign countries, look at Western countries. All of them were advising countries like India that large fiscal deficits are bad. But when they were hit with the 2008 financial crisis or the 2020 COVID crisis, they never hesitated to bring the government back, to even nationalize some of the firms, including banks and insurance companies, and borrowing from the market up to about 10 to 20% of the GDP and spending in the economy, because they realized that this is a life and death issue. You can either put the people to complete hunger and misery and go through the crisis, or you will have to help them survive. And they realized that the best way to go about it is to provide adequate amounts of relief to people, if necessary, including cash transfers, and tied through the crisis. India has chosen a different path. India has said that we are not going to do that. That is why you see a pittance of spending of rupees 3.5 lakh crore only in the last year, when this is rupees 3.5 lakh crore additional spending is very normal for an economy. And you are seeing an abnormal year. In an abnormal year, your response also has to be abnormal, right? But you don't see it in India. That is a really sad situation that we have. So I don't see, if the fiscal deficit is double digit, any foreign investor would be scared to come into India, because they can't find any country in the world with a single digit fiscal deficit. All countries are running high fiscal deficits. So why should you look for a single digit fiscal deficit? Everybody, including United States, EU, UK, Japan, everybody is running high fiscal deficits. Why should India stand apart?
Professor, should we take two more questions and then wind
Sure,
up, or
sure.
okay? Sure. The next question is
Yes, Aniket, how can we see budget through the lens of Make in India scheme? See, Make in India scheme is a failure. Okay, look at the amount of investments that have come into India over the past many years from the time it has been announced. Last year, I wrote an article where I looked at these numbers, where I found that not more than 1.5 lakh crore rupees have come into India as part of these particular schemes. Right? So that's actually very little compared to what has been targeted. So I do not think a Make in India scheme is a success. The reason why I think Make in India scheme is not a success is not just because you have a largely unskilled workforce and so on. Your industrial policy is not tuned to the requirements of an economy of the stage of development that India is in. Your industrial policy is inadequate, is ill-formed for the requirements of a country like India. You need, for example, you need large developmental banks in India. Even Germany, Japan, all of them have large developmental banks. What did you do in India? You had developmental banks. IDBI was an example. What did you do? You had banks like SBI and other nationalized banks which do short-term lending, and you had banks like IDBI which did long-term lending, which borrowed from the market and allowed for lending, right? But with the coming in of liberalization, you broke down this distinction between short-term lending and long-term lending. You made IDBI into a normal bank and asked them to give short-term loans also. And you made SBI a long-term bank, and you asked SBI to give loans to Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi and others of 7,000, 8,000 crores. As a result, scheduled commercial banks of India, like SBI, for example, had deposits which were short-term in terms of liabilities, but their loans were long-term. Okay, so you had short-term deposits but long-term loans. As a result, one small problem will mean a huge crisis in banking. Right? So liberalization policy in India has basically undermined developmental finance in India. This budget actually brings back a developmental finance bank institution, DFI, right? And some good sense has gone into the government this year. There's an announcement that they will form a DFI. But why not revive IDBI then? You already have an IDBI, you have staff there. Why create a new institution? Because there's a lot of irrationality in what the government is planning. But in my view, the clear problem is that we have managed our industrial policy very poorly. We don't have a developmental financial institution to take care of the requirements of industrial needs. We have pushed them into the stock market and the financial market at large to generate resources, which has meant much more fragility both in the financial market and in the revenue raising capacities of industrial houses. And that is a big problem that we have in India. Kulvinder, hi. Do you think it's the priority of this government to is something opposite to that of UPA, or what should it give the world we are in at present? Instead of science and new innovations, they are reviving the nostalgia of ancient India and taking us backward and abandoning the forward-going approach. I'm reminded of a joke of my friend who when the union minister, uh, what is his name? He was the former Mumbai police commissioner. He made this statement that the whole idea of Darwin's evolution is wrong. Uh, the idea of evolution is wrong because nobody ever saw an ape becoming a man, and hence there is no evidence of the theory of evolution. Right? One of my friends quipped, "Oh, maybe we don't have evidence of the ape becoming a man. We certainly are seeing right in front of us the man becoming an ape." Right? So that's one part. I'm also reminded of another comment by another of my friends, Shamsul Islam, where he said, talked once of a debate between Golwalkar and Nehru, where uh, where Nehru told Golwalkar that you are trying to take the country 500 years into the history, back into the history. Golwalkar said, Nehruji, you are wrong. We are not trying to take the country 500 years back in history. We are trying to take the country 5,000 years back into history. Right? So the ideological basis of the government is very clear. You want to become an ape from a man. All traces of modernity are being discarded. Uh, Myths are being put forward as evidence. Right? Mythology is your history. There is no place for evidence, scientific method in the way you want to look at your country, your past, and so on. Atmanirbhar Bharat is put forward with the claim that India in history was a self sufficient country. Never in the history was India a self sufficient country. That's a myth again, another myth that is used to put forward a very romantic concept of your past. Right? So, this government, one of the most important problems I see with this government is complete lack of rationality in not just fields of society, history and culture, but if it had a rational view of things, it would never have implemented demonetization. It would never have implemented GST reform. Right? In other words, you basically see no space for reason in policy making. You want to walk backwards. You want to be more traditionalist. You want to you without you want to be modern. You want to be modern, but you don't want to kill what keeps you traditional. For example, the caste system, the systems of discrimination in India, the complete eroding of constitutionalism in this country. All those don't make you modern; they make you pre-modern, right? So very clearly, I see the priorities of this government are very clearly very problematic in terms of the complete absence of rationality and reason in thinking about and implementing and designing policies. That is something very important that we need to remember.
So, Professor, we can take one last question and then we can wind up.
Asha, uh, government claims a success on the production linked incentive scheme for manufacturers. What is the reality? There is no reality here, Asha. Primarily because if you look at the incentive schemes and the number of takers for these incentive schemes, I don't have the numbers with me right away. I should have kept them by my side. But what I have read about it clearly is that the number of takers for the production linked incentive scheme is very low in number, right? I gave you the example, another example, which will give you an idea of this. The government announced a 1 lakh crore scheme for FPOs, for example. Hmm? How much you have seen? Only about 2,900 crore have been given loans, worth of loans have been given in principle sanctioned till now. Right? All these incentive schemes are also, some manufacturers here and there have received it, but the requirements of our MSME sector are simply very huge. That what the government has given to them is simply a drop in the ocean, not more than that. So it's hugely inadequate for the needs of our small industrial sector.
Okay. So, thank you so much, Professor, for yes. So thank you so much, Professor, for joining us today. We are really honored to have you here for our ninth annual budget lecture. And this was a really enriching discussion. And thank you for all the participants also to stay with us. And we hope that we'll have you next year as well. And yes, that is it. Also, yes, thank you again, and thank you everyone.
Thank you, Punya. Thank you, Progressive Students
Thank
Forum.
you.
Thank you very much. Stay safe.